A millionaire watched his daughter humiliated by wealthy kids in a restaurant. 2 hours later, he took action that stunned everyone. The sterling restaurant glittered like a treasure in the city center. Its grand windows mirrored the glow of the evening city lights, while inside, the soft clink of fine glassware and the hum of refined conversation added to its air of exclusivity. This was where the city's elite gathered to see and be seen, where the biggest deals were made over elegant, linen-covered tables, and where image was everything. Jonathan Harrison, a businessman known well before he even walked through the door, stepped confidently into the restaurant. His tailored suit and sophisticated demeanor immediately caught the attention of fellow diners, though all eyes were drawn to the young girl at his side. Doris, his 8-year-old daughter, moved beside him with a grace far beyond her years, her blue silk dress flowing gently with each step. "Good evening, Mr. Harrison," the maître d' greeted him with a formal bow. "Your table is ready, as always." Jonathan responded with a polite nod and led Doris to their usual table, tucked into a prime corner of the dining room. As they walked, heads turned in their direction, some faces admiring, others envious, and a few displaying thinly veiled curiosity. "Dad." "Why is everyone staring at us?" Doris whispered, holding her father's hand a little tighter. Jonathan bent down, smiling warmly. "Because you're the most beautiful girl here, my princess, and because your dad's a pretty important guy." Doris nodded, but her gaze held a depth beyond her years, as though she sensed that the looks went beyond simple admiration. Seated at the table, Jonathan watched his daughter with pride. It had been too long since they'd enjoyed a dinner like this, just the two of them. The past few months had been a blur of meetings, travel, and corporate decisions, pulling him away from what mattered most. "What would you like to eat, Doris?" he asked, handing her a menu specially designed for children with fun illustrations. Doris studied the menu intently, as if she were choosing the most critical meal of her life. "Do you think I could order the pasta with truffle sauce?" she asked. Jonathan chuckled warmly. "Of course you can. I'm thrilled to see you developing a taste for the finer things." Just as they were about to wave over the waiter, Jonathan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He frowned at the caller ID. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I need to take this. It's really important. You'll be okay on your own for a bit." Doris gave him a mature nod. "Don't worry about me, Dad." Jonathan stood, planting a quick kiss on her forehead before moving to a quieter spot in the restaurant to take the call. Unknowingly, he left his young daughter in the midst of curious and, in some cases, judgmental eyes from nearby diners. While Jonathan negotiated a multi-million-dollar merger, Doris sat swinging her feet, barely reaching the floor. That's when she noticed a group of slightly older kids at a nearby table glancing her way with amused sidelong glances. Their snickers made her want to shrink into her chair. "Look at the little princess," a boy sneered, just loud enough for her to hear. "Bet she doesn't even know how to use a fork right." A girl with a giant hair bow chimed in. Her dad probably brought her out just because he felt bad. Everyone knows Mr. Harrison's way, more into business than family. Doris felt her eyes stinging with tears, but she wouldn't let them fall. She recalled her late mother's words, "A Harrison always holds their head high, no matter what." With a strength beyond her years, Doris straightened in her seat, pretending she hadn't heard the cruel remarks. When Jonathan returned to the table, he didn't notice the change in his daughter's mood right away, caught up in the excitement of his successful deal. "Great news, Doris. I just finalized." He stopped mid-sentence, noticing a different look in her eyes, a trace of sadness mixed with resilience. "What's wrong, sweetie? Did something happen while I was away?" Doris shook her head, mustering a smile. "No, Dad. It's all good. Now, about your call. Jonathan paused, feeling a tug at his fatherly instincts that something wasn't quite right. But before he could press further, the waiter arrived to take their order. The meal went on, with Jonathan trying to lift Doris's spirits and her responding with quiet resolve, hiding the pain of those words she had overheard. Neither of them could have guessed that this evening would be a turning point, planting the seeds for events that would soon rock not only the Harrison family, but the entire high society of their city. At nearby tables, adults carried on with their usual small talk, entirely oblivious to the little drama that had played out among the children. Jonathan, equally unaware, was about to set off on a journey that would not only challenge his devotion to Doris, but also force him to confront his beliefs and his role in the world he had worked so hard to shape. In the days after the dinner at the Sterling, life appeared to resume its normal rhythm for the Harrison family. Jonathan continued his schedule of meetings and deals, while Doris returned to her prestigious private school. Yet, beneath this calm routine, a deep shift was stirring. Jonathan couldn't shake the memory of Doris from that night at the restaurant. Though she hadn't spoken up, her expressive eyes had conveyed a quiet hurt he couldn't ignore. This thought haunted him, causing him to revisit the choices he'd made over the years. One afternoon, while going over some documents in his study, he heard a faint sob coming from Doris's room. Without a second thought, he rose from his desk and walked over. He stopped in front of her door, decorated with butterflies and stars, and paused briefly before knocking. "Doris, honey, can I come in?" he asked softly. After a brief period of silence, there was the sound of hurried shuffling. Finally, he heard a gentle, "Yes, Dad." Jonathan opened the door carefully. With an open book on her lap, Doris was reading while sitting on her bed among her plush animals. Her eyes were slightly red, but she wore a serene expression, almost too grown up for her age. "What's going on, Princess? Are you all right?" Jonathan asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Doris nodded, trying to smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, Dad. I was just reading a sad story." Jonathan glanced at the book, recognizing it as one of the fairy tale collections he'd given her. He knew that nothing in those pages could bring about the kind of pain he'd heard in her cry. "Doris," he began gently, choosing his words with care, "you know you can talk to me about anything, don't you? If something's bothering you, I want to know so I can help." For a moment, Doris looked like she might brush it off, but then, as if a barrier had collapsed, her tears began to flow. "The kids at school, they're like the ones at the restaurant," she sobbed. "They say terrible things, Dad. About you, about me, about Mom." Jonathan felt like he'd taken a hard punch to the gut. Discovering that his daughter had been silently enduring so much, not just during that restaurant scene but also at school, flooded him with both guilt and anger. "Oh, Doris," he murmured, pulling her into a protective hug. "I'm so sorry. I should have known sooner." As he held his daughter, letting her cry on his shoulder, Jonathan realized just how far he'd drifted from what truly mattered. His drive to build a business empire, to be the best in his field, had blinded him to his most essential role, being a father. "I promise you things are going to change," he vowed, gently pulling back to look her in the eyes. "I won't let anyone hurt you like this again." Doris gazed at him, her face a blend of hope and uncertainty. "But Dad, how? You can't be with me all the time and they're the kids of your friends, of your business partners." Her words struck Jonathan hard. The world he'd created, the social circles they were part of, suddenly felt shallow and hollow. What was all his success worth if he couldn't shield his own daughter from the cruelty within that very world? "You're right. I can't be with you every moment," Jonathan admitted, "but I can teach you to be strong and to not let their words hurt you. And even more, I can show you there are things far more valuable than money or social status." Right then, Jonathan made a choice that would change their lives. It wouldn't be an overnight shift, but it was the start of a journey that would help them both rediscover what it truly meant to be a part of the Harrison family. "How about we skip school tomorrow and spend the day together?" he proposed, an idea forming in his mind. "I've got something important I want to show you." Doris's face lit up with a mix of surprise and excitement. "Really? Don't you have to work?" Jonathan smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "Nothing's more important than you, Doris. It's about time I prove that." That night, while Doris slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Jonathan stayed awake, planning. He wasn't just thinking about how to rebuild his bond with her, but also how to confront the larger issue, the toxic environment they'd been part of for too long. He realized it wouldn't be easy. The same elite circles that had brought him wealth and influence were now casting shadows over his daughter's happiness and safety. He knew he'd have to be cautious and shrewd, yet resolute. As Jonathan Harrison gazed out from his study, watching the city lights flicker below, he felt he was standing on the edge of something monumental. Protecting Doris went beyond her immediate well-being. It was about reshaping his own beliefs and maybe even challenging the values of his entire social circle. With this determination, Jonathan finally went to bed, readying himself for a day that would signal a shift for him and his daughter. Unbeknownst to him, his decisions would soon spark a chain of events that would ripple through high society, bringing long-buried truths to light and straining alliances once thought unbreakable. At dawn, Jonathan was already up and prepared for the day he'd planned. He dressed in casual clothes, a rare choice for him, and headed toward Doris's room. She was awake, sitting on her bed, with a look of excitement tinged with curiosity. "Good morning, Princess," Jonathan greeted her with a warm smile. "Ready for our adventure?" Doris nodded, springing up with enthusiasm. "Where are we going, Dad?" she asked. "It's a surprise," he replied with a grin. "But throw on something comfy. No fancy dresses today." While Doris dressed, Jonathan quickly called his assistant, cancelling all his meetings. Though his assistant sounded puzzled, Jonathan was unwavering. Today, Doris was his priority. An hour later, father and daughter left their grand mansion in a modest rental car, not the usual limousine. Doris looked out the window curiously as they left behind the upscale neighborhoods she'd always known. "Why this car, Dad?" she asked, sensing something was different. Jonathan smiled, eyes on the road. "Because today, we're exploring a part of the city we don't know very well, sweetheart." After nearly an hour of driving, they arrived in a modest neighborhood on the city's outskirts. The streets buzzed with life, kids playing on the sidewalks, vendors calling out their goods, neighbors chatting and laughing together. Jonathan parked outside a well-worn but tidy building with a faded sign that read, "Hope Community Center." "What is this place, Dad?" Doris asked as they stepped out of the car. "It's a special place," Jonathan answered. "Here, they help people who don't have as much as we do." Melissa, a warm-hearted woman in her 50s with a kind smile and gentle eyes, welcomed them as they entered. "Mr. Harrison, what a nice surprise to see you here. And this must be young Doris. Welcome." Jonathan greeted Melissa like an old friend, which caught Doris a bit off guard. "Melissa, thank you for having us on such short notice. I wanted Doris to see the incredible work you do here." Melissa nodded with understanding. "Absolutely. We're just getting lunch ready for the kids in the neighborhood. Would you like to lend a hand?" Doris glanced at her dad, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I'd love to," she replied softly, warming to the idea. Before long, Doris found herself in the kitchen of the center, pitching in to make sandwiches alongside a team of volunteers. Though she felt a bit out of place at first, she soon got into the rhythm and began to enjoy herself. Meanwhile, Jonathan was busy organizing donations of clothes and books for the center. When lunch was served, Doris joined the neighborhood kids. Initially shy, she quickly realized that these kids welcomed her warmly, not caring about her fancy last name or her designer clothes. "Want to play with us afterward?" asked a girl named Haley, who looked about Doris's age. Doris glanced at her dad, who gave her a smile and another nod. "I'd love to," she replied, her face lighting up with a genuine smile. As Doris played in the center's courtyard, Jonathan stood by the window, watching her. Melissa joined him and remarked, "She's a lovely girl, Jonathan. You can tell she has a generous heart, just like her dad." Jonathan sighed. "I've been so focused on building my business that I nearly forgot the real priorities. I want Doris to know there's more to life than just money and status." Melissa nodded in agreement. "That's an important lesson, and it's never too late to learn or teach." On the way home, Doris was unusually quiet, deep in thought. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Jonathan asked. Doris looked up at him, her eyes reflecting a new understanding. "Dad, those kids don't have much, but they were so happy, and they were really nice to me, even though they didn't know me." Jonathan smiled, feeling a mix of pride and gratitude. "Because of how we treat others and the memories we create together. Doris, true wealth is not dependent on what we own." "Can we come back another day?" Doris asked hopefully. "Sure thing," Jonathan replied with a warm smile. "Actually, I was thinking we could make it a regular thing. How does that sound?" Doris's face lit up, showing a genuine joy that Jonathan hadn't seen in ages. That evening, as he tucked her in, Jonathan noticed a difference in his daughter. There was a newfound spark in her eyes, a sense of confidence that hadn't been there before. "Dad," Doris whispered, just before he switched off the light, "I think I get now what Mom meant about being a true Harrison." Jonathan turned back, intrigued. "And what does that mean to you, sweetheart?" he asked. "It's not about money, or what people say about us," she replied thoughtfully. "It's about how we treat others, and doing what's right." Jonathan felt a surge of emotion in his chest. "Your mum would be so proud of you, Doris," he said softly. "And so am I." Closing her door, Jonathan felt that today had been eye-opening, not just for Doris, but for him too. It rekindled something he'd lost in his race for success and status. As he made his way to his study, Jonathan realized that shifting his priorities would bring challenges, especially in dealing with the rigid expectations of his social and business circles. Sitting down at his desk, he started sketching a plan, not only to play a bigger role at the Hope Community Center, but also to reconsider his business dealings and relationships. From now on, he wanted his actions to align with the values he hoped to teach Doris. What Jonathan didn't foresee was that his change of heart would ruffle some feathers. Behind the scenes, certain individuals within his social network, intent on keeping things as they were, began to see him as a threat. And as the days passed following their visit to the Hope Community Center, changes started to unfold in the Harrison household. Jonathan, keeping his promise, restructured his schedule to spend more time with Doris and to immerse himself in community efforts. His new direction did not go unnoticed by the upper echelons of society. One afternoon, as Jonathan worked in his city office, an unexpected visitor arrived. Gabriel Holmes, one of his oldest and most influential partners, walked in unannounced, his face set in a tense smile. "Jonathan, my friend," Gabriel greeted him, his tone forced but friendly. "Got a moment?" Jonathan raised his brows in surprise, but gestured for him to sit. "Well, Gabriel, what brings you here?" Jonathan asked as Gabriel settled into the chair across from his desk. Gabriel's eyes wandered around the office before landing on Jonathan. "I've been hearing things, Jonathan. Some troubling things." troubling things. Jonathan raised an eyebrow, feigning nonchalance. Care to be more specific? Leaning forward, Gabriel lowered his voice as if someone else might overhear. Word is, you've been skipping out on key meetings, declining invites to important events, and, well, showing up in parts of town that aren't exactly on the up and up. Jonathan's expression remained neutral, though a hint of frustration simmered beneath the surface. Didn't realize my personal choices were such a hot topic, Gabriel. Oh, come on, Jonathan. Gabriel let out a forced laugh. You know as well as I do that in our world, everything becomes a topic. People talk, and those whispers can impact deals and reputations. And what is it exactly that has you concerned, Gabriel? Jonathan's tone grew colder. Gabriel sighed heavily, as if bracing himself. Some of our associates are uneasy. They're worried your recent activities could jeopardize certain deals or sensitive information. Jonathan rose slowly, fixing a sharp gaze on Gabriel. Let's get something straight, Gabriel. My priorities may have shifted, but my integrity hasn't wavered. I'm not about to jeopardize anyone or anything. Jonathan, you have to understand, Gabriel said, standing up as well. The world we're in is precarious. One wrong move, one ill-placed word, and everything we've built could be at risk. Jonathan stepped around his desk, moving closer to Gabriel. Is that a threat? Gabriel raised his hands, taking a small step back. Not at all, my friend. It's a warning from someone who cares. Just be cautious, Jonathan. Not everyone's going to approve of your new ventures. With that, Gabriel gave a nod and left. Jonathan, lost in thought, reflected on the encounter. Gabriel's visit had only confirmed his suspicions. His shift in focus was stirring up the still waters of his social circle. That evening at dinner, Jonathan's attention drifted to his daughter, Doris, who seemed more vibrant and confident since they'd started volunteering at the community center. Dad, Doris said suddenly, pulling him from his thoughts, could we invite Haley over sometime? Haley? From the community center? Jonathan asked, surprised. Doris nodded eagerly. Yeah, she's my new friend. She taught me to play hopscotch, and in return, I showed her how to make friendship bracelets. She's got such a great sense of fun. Jonathan grinned, feeling both pride and a twinge of worry. Absolutely, sweetheart. We can have her over any time you'd like, he assured Doris, who was chattering on about her new friend. Still, Jonathan's mind drifted to his conversation with Gabriel. How would his social circle respond if they found out he was welcoming a working-class girl into his home? Later that evening, after tucking Doris in, Jonathan settled into his study. In his leather armchair, whiskey in hand, he pondered the recent changes. On one side, he was thrilled to see Doris growing into a kind, confident young girl. On the other hand, Gabriel's subtle warnings and the increasingly strained social circles weighed on him. Jonathan knew he was at a turning point. He could either step back into the security of his comfortable, detached lifestyle or move forward, risking the fallout from defying societal expectations. As he considered his choices, his gaze fell on a photograph of his late wife. Her words echoed in his memory. A true Harrison doesn't give in to pressure, but holds steady to their beliefs. With a deep breath, Jonathan resolved to stay the course, now more determined than ever. If his world couldn't handle these changes, maybe it was time to reshape that world. What Jonathan couldn't foresee, however, was that this decision would spark a chain of events that would shake the foundations of his social sphere, unearth hidden truths, and challenge unshakable loyalties. Meanwhile, across town, Gabriel Holmes met in secret with a few powerful men. Their discussion? How to manage the Harrison issue before it spun out of control. The clash of wills was about to begin, and none, not even Jonathan, could predict the impact his actions would have on everyone involved. Just as dawn broke, Jonathan Harrison stepped into the Hope Community Center, but this time he wasn't there to simply lend a hand or to be with Doris. He had something much larger in mind. Melissa, the center's director, greeted him, surprised and curious. "Mr. Harrison, we didn't expect you here so early. Is everything okay?" Jonathan nodded, resolve shining in his eyes. "Melissa, I need your help. I want to do a lot more for this center and for the whole neighborhood. So much more." Over the next few hours, Jonathan and Melissa mapped out bold ideas, expanding the center, launching job training programs, and enhancing local schools. Jonathan was ready to contribute not just financially but also through his time and connections. "This is incredible, Jonathan," Melissa said, her voice full of emotion at the scale of the plans. "But are you absolutely sure? This could stir up trouble for you." Jonathan's expression softened, though it held a firm resolve. "My world could use a change, Melissa, and this feels like the place to begin." Meanwhile, at the upscale Blue Sky Club, Gabriel Holmes was meeting with a carefully chosen group of the city's influential figures. Among them were Brian Long, a media mogul, Cynthia Reynolds, a major political player, and Logan Singh, a Supreme Court judge. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gabriel began with a somber tone that filled the private room, "we have a problem. Jonathan Harrison is starting to stray from his intended path." "Stray?" Cynthia asked, one eyebrow arched. "Explain." Gabriel went on to outline Jonathan's recent shifts in behavior, his time in struggling neighborhoods, his keen interest in community projects, and his noticeable lack of engagement in the businesses and social events he once prioritized. "This could lead to complications," murmured Logan, the judge, sharing a meaningful look with the others. Brian Long, the media mogul, leaned in, his gaze a mix of intrigue and apprehension. "How much does Jonathan know? Are we at risk of him uncovering anything?" Gabriel shook his head slightly. "No concrete knowledge on his part, as of yet. But if he keeps following this route, digging into things better left hidden, we'll have to intervene," Cynthia declared, her voice coldly decisive. "The question is, how?" Jonathan returned to his office feeling energized from his conversation with Melissa, while the elite group made plans in the opulent club. Walking in, he noticed his assistant, Laura, looking unusually tense. "Mr. Harrison, you have a visitor. He says it's urgent." Curious, Jonathan entered his office to find an unexpected face waiting for him. Mike Powell, an investigative journalist known for exposing corporate scandals. "Mr. Harrison," Mike greeted, standing to shake his hand. "Thank you for seeing me without prior notice." Jonathan returned the handshake, intrigued. "What can I do for you, Mr. Powell?" Jonathan asked. Mike glanced around cautiously before speaking. Lowering his voice, Mike leaned closer. "I've got some information that might pique your interest about your associates." For the next hour, Mike laid out a collection of documents and recordings, each one revealing a web of corruption that wove through the city's elite, involving figures like Gabriel Holmes and other conspirators tied to the Blue Sky Club. "Why are you showing me this?" Jonathan asked, taken aback by the flood of information. Mike held his gaze. "Because you're changing, Mr. Harrison. I think you could be the ally we need to expose the whole network." Jonathan sat back, his thoughts racing. The files Mike had shown him were explosive, packed with evidence that could bring down people he'd once called friends and partners. But there was a greater chance here, a chance to finally clean up the city from the corruption that had weighed it down for so long. "I need time to think," Jonathan said at last, still processing the gravity of it all. This changes everything." Mike nodded, understanding. "I get it. But time isn't on our side. I think they're catching on that I'm onto them. And if they find out I've talked to you." His unfinished sentence lingered in the air, carrying a tense warning. Later that evening, Jonathan sat down to dinner with his daughter, Doris. Yet he couldn't shake the conversation with Mike from his mind, even as Doris chatted about her school day. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked, noticing his preoccupation. "You seem distracted." Jonathan forced a reassuring smile. "I'm all right, sweetheart. I just got some big decisions on my mind." Doris looked at him thoughtfully, with wisdom beyond her years. "Mom always said that when you're faced with a tough decision, you should follow your heart." Her words struck Jonathan deeply. He remembered why he'd started this journey of change in the first place, to be a better father, to make a better world for his daughter. Later, after Doris was asleep, Jonathan returned to his study. He pulled out the documents Mike had given him and began to review them again. The more he read, the more his resolve hardened. Finally, he picked up the phone and dialed. "Mike, it's Jonathan Harrison. Count me in. What's the next step?" Across the city at the Blue Sky Club, Gabriel Holmes received an urgent call. "Mr. Holmes, we've got a situation. Harrison's been meeting with Mike Powell." Gabriel's face went white. "Get everyone together. Things just took a turn." As night wore on, two groups braced themselves for an unavoidable clash. On one side stood Jonathan, alongside an unexpected partner in Mike Powell. Opposing them was an elite circle led by Gabriel, ready to go to any lengths to keep their secrets hidden. But what none of them realized was that their actions would set off a chain of events, shaking the very core of the city, uncovering truths long buried, and challenging loyalties once thought unbreakable. Amid it all, a little 8-year-old girl slept soundly, blissfully unaware of the storm her father was about to unleash, all in the name of love and justice. The coming days turned into a blur for Jonathan Harrison. Each morning, he kept up his usual schedule, breakfast with Doris, dropping her off at school, then heading to his office. But his afternoons and nights were now dedicated to a covert and dangerous mission. In a modest apartment tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, Jonathan met with Mike and a small team of reliable journalists and investigators. Together, they sifted through documents, scrutinized recordings, and mapped connections that exposed a corruption network far wider than they had initially suspected. Mike said one night, his face lit up by the glow of his computer, "This is more extensive than we thought, Jonathan. It's not just local businessmen and politicians. There are international ties, large-scale money laundering." Jonathan's expression grew somber. "I know. And every day it hits me how deep I've been in this, even if unintentionally." "Don't be too hard on yourself," cut in Delana, a young journalist in their group. "What matters is that you're making it right now." Meanwhile, outside, Jonathan's absence from social gatherings and business events hadn't gone unnoticed. Gabriel Holmes's increasing paranoia and his associates were causing rumors to spread. One afternoon, while picking Doris up from school, Jonathan noticed a black car trailing them. Heart pounding, he took an unexpected turn, confirming his suspicions when the car followed suit. "Dad, why are we going this way?" Doris asked, sensing the shift. Jonathan forced a smile, keeping his composure for her sake. "Thought we'd try a new route today, sweetie. How about some ice cream?" He managed to lose the tailing car, but the encounter left him rattled to his core. Late that night, after confirming Doris was fast asleep, Jonathan picked up the phone and called Mike. "I think someone's been tailing me," he whispered. "We need to move faster." Mike sighed on the other end. "I had a feeling this might come up, Jonathan. You might want to consider sending Doris somewhere safe for a bit." The idea landed on Jonathan like a punch to the gut. The thought of being apart from his daughter, even temporarily, felt like a physical ache. But deep down, he knew Mike was right. Things were turning risky. The next day, Jonathan met with Melissa, the head of the Hope Community Center. His voice was tight as he started, "Melissa, I need a big favor." "Could you look after Doris for a few weeks?" he asked, the weight of his words hanging between them. Melissa's eyes filled with worry. "Jonathan, what's going on? You know I'd do anything for you and Doris, but this sounds serious." Jonathan explained just enough for Melissa to grasp the seriousness of the situation without delving into details that could put her at risk. After a pause, she finally said, "Of course I'll take care of her. But Jonathan, please be careful. That girl needs you." That evening, Jonathan had the hardest talk of his life with Doris. Sitting on the edge of her bed, he started, "Sweetheart, remember when we talked about how doing the right thing can sometimes be tough?" Doris nodded, her wide eyes focused on him. "Yes, Dad. Like when you said you wanted to help more at the community center." Jonathan gave her a sad smile. "Exactly. Right now, I have to do something very important. Something right. But it might be a little dangerous." Alarm flashed across Doris's face. "Dangerous? What's happening, Dad?" Jonathan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry, love. Everything will be fine. But to keep you safe, you're going to stay with Melissa for a bit." Doris flung herself into his arms, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't want to go, Dad. I'm scared." Jonathan held her close, fighting back his own tears. "I know, honey, I'm scared too. But remember what Mum used to say about being brave?" Doris sniffled, nodding against his chest. "She said being brave isn't about not being scared, but about doing the right thing despite being scared." "Exactly," Jonathan said softly, leaning back just enough to meet her gaze. "And you, my little Doris, you're the bravest person I've ever known." The next morning, with a heavy heart, Jonathan brought Doris to the Hope Community Center. As he watched her walk away, holding Melissa's hand, he felt like a part of himself was slipping away. Jonathan knew it was a necessary choice for Doris, for the memory of his wife, and for the city he cherished. Sitting back in his car, he took a steady breath and dialed a number. "Mike, I'm ready. It's time to go public with everything we have." What Jonathan didn't realize was that Gabriel Holmes and his associates were setting their own risky plan in motion to silence him. The final showdown was approaching, and the fate of countless lives hung in the balance. A heavy, storm-laden sky greeted the city at dawn, as if reflecting the brewing chaos. Jonathan Harrison stood in the Beacon Journal's newsroom with Mike Powell and a team of reporters. Tension buzzed in the room, thick with anticipation. "Once we release this, there's no going back," Mike warned, his hand hovering over the keyboard, ready to publish the exposé. "Do it," Jonathan said, unwavering. "It's time for the truth to come out." With one click, the story went live online, and the presses churned out the special edition of the paper. Social media erupted, and major news stations broke into regular programming to cover the scandal. Meanwhile, at the exclusive Blue Sky Club, Gabriel Holmes and his group held an emergency meeting. "How did we let this happen?" Gabriel shouted, slamming the newspaper onto the table. Cynthia Reynolds, the politician, remained unruffled, her expression cool and composed. "We have to manage the fallout," she said calmly. "Alexander, can you use your media contacts to discredit this?" Brian Long, the media mogul, shook his head. "It's too late. The evidence is airtight." "We'll need a more extreme approach," Logan Singh, the judge, finally spoke in a somber tone. "I know some people who could take care of Harrison." Silence filled the room, and after a tense pause, Gabriel gave a slow nod. "Do what you have to do. We can't let this keep happening." At the Hope Community Center, Melissa watched the news with a mixture of pride and dread. Sitting close by, Doris stared at the TV, her father's face filling the screen. Her eyes were wide with worry. "Is my dad in trouble?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Melissa pulled her into a comforting hug, trying to reassure her despite her own uncertainty. "Your dad is incredibly brave, Doris. He's doing what's right." As the day went on, the city was engulfed in organized chaos. Spontaneous protests broke out outside corporate buildings and government offices tied to the scandal. The police seemed lost on how to handle the situation, especially since some of their senior officers were implicated. They did their best to keep control, but the tension was high. Jonathan, fully aware that he was in danger, kept moving, changing his location every few hours. Mike and his team had set up a network of safe houses across the city, and Jonathan moved from one to the next, staying just ahead of those searching for him. In one of these safe houses, he received an unexpected call from his assistant, Laura. "Mr. Harrison," Laura's voice shook, "I just heard something terrible. They're planning to go after Doris to get to you." Jonathan felt his heart stop for a second. "What? Are you sure?" "I overheard Gabriel Holmes on the phone. He talked about using the girl as leverage, Mr. Harrison. You have to keep her safe." Jonathan's mind raced as he ended the call. He couldn't turn to the police, unsure of how many might be in on the corruption. Heart pounding, he called Melissa. "Melissa, listen carefully," he said urgently as she answered. "You need to get Doris out of there right now. It's not safe." "Jonathan, what's going on?" Melissa's voice was filled with alarm. "There's no time to explain. Take her to this address." He gave her the details for one of the safe houses. "And Melissa?" "Thank you." Back at the Hope Community Center, Melissa acted swiftly. "Doris, sweetheart, we need to leave now." Doris didn't ask questions, sensing the urgency in Melissa's tone. They grabbed only the essentials and slipped out through the back door, just in time. Moments later, a group of menacing men entered the center from the front, asking about Jonathan Harrison's daughter. Out on the streets, tension was at a boiling point. Jonathan's revelations had struck a chord with the public, stirring years of pent-up frustration over corruption and inequality. What began as peaceful demonstrations was now spiraling into chaos in some areas. Gabriel Holmes and his group could only watch in dismay as everything they'd built unraveled. Their phones buzzed non-stop, business contacts breaking off, political allies stepping back, reporters calling for statements. "This is getting out of control," Brian Long muttered as he stared at footage of the protests on the news. Cynthia Reynolds, always quick to strategize, cut in. "We need someone to take the fall." The group's gaze shifted to Gabriel. Gabriel met their eyes, suddenly aware of his vulnerable position. "Don't even think about it," he started, but sirens drowned him out. Within seconds, officers stormed into the Blue Sky Club, but these weren't the corrupt cops they expected to shield them. Federal agents, part of an anti-corruption task force that had been secretly investigating for months, stepped forward. "Gabriel Holmes," declared the leader, "you're under arrest for corruption, fraud, and conspiracy." As the cuffs snapped on his wrists, Gabriel turned on his former allies. "You can't do this. We'll all go down together." But his pleas were ignored. The once powerful group, masters of the city's underbelly, was unraveling as each member scrambled to save themselves. Meanwhile, across town, Jonathan was finally reunited with Doris and Melissa at the safe house. Hugging his daughter tightly, Jonathan's tears flowed freely. "Dad, I was so scared," Doris sobbed. "I know, sweetheart," Jonathan replied, gently stroking her hair. "I was too. But you're safe now. Everything's going to be okay." Melissa looked on, her face a mix of relief and worry. "Jonathan, what happens now?" Jonathan's face was set with a mix of resolve and optimism. Now, Melissa, we rebuild. We clean up this city and make it fairer for Doris and every kid who deserves a better future. As night settled over the city, the protests began to ease. News of the arrests and the promise of a thorough investigation had calmed the public, at least for now. Jonathan knew the path ahead would be rough. Undoing years of corruption and changing a culture built on inequality wouldn't be simple. As Jonathan gazed at Doris, he was reminded of why he'd embarked on this journey to begin with. "Dad," Doris said unexpectedly, "can we go back to the community center soon? I want to help like you do." A warm smile spread across Jonathan's face, pride filling his chest. "Absolutely, sweetheart. I think we all have a lot to learn by giving back there." While the city rested from the day's chaos, a new chapter was unfolding, one focused on honesty, justice, and optimism. At the heart of it all stood Jonathan Harrison, the man who had risked everything to make things right, motivated by love for his daughter and a vision of a better world for her. The storm had passed, but the real work was only just beginning. Rebuilding would be tough, but Jonathan felt a renewed determination, bolstered by allies like Melissa and Mike, and the truth on his side. For the first time in years, the future seemed promising. In the whirlwind months following the exposure of the corruption network, Jonathan and the city found themselves transforming together. New anti-corruption laws were passed, companies restructured, and a renewed belief in justice began to spread. Jonathan, now seen as a hero by many, split his time between assisting authorities in eradicating the last remnants of corruption and his efforts at the Hope Community Center, now a beacon for the city's fresh start. One bright afternoon, as Jonathan oversaw the center's expansion, funded by donations from citizens moved by his story, Doris approached him, a pensive look on her face. "Dad, can I ask you something?" she began, her eyes revealing the wisdom she'd gained through recent events. "Of course, honey." "What's on your mind?" Jonathan replied, bending down to her level. "Do you think Mum would be proud of us?" Her question struck Jonathan deeply, bringing a tightness to his throat. It had been a while since they'd talked about Natalie, his late wife. "Oh, Doris," he whispered, pulling her into a hug. "I know she'd be so proud. Especially of you, my brave girl." Later that night, after Doris was asleep, Jonathan found himself leafing through old photo albums. Seeing Natalie's smiling, vibrant face in the photos stirred long-buried memories. One photo stood out, a picture of Natalie in front of the old The Beacon Journal building, where Mike now worked. Jonathan recalled that Natalie used to be a journalist, driven by a deep desire to expose the truth and seek justice long before they were married. Suddenly inspired, Jonathan reached out to his friend Mike. "Mike, I need your help with something," he said, as soon as Mike picked up. "I want to know more about the work Natalie was doing in journalism before we got married." Over the following days, as the city slowly moved toward recovery and growth, Jonathan dug into Natalie's past. With Mike's assistance, he uncovered that Natalie had been pursuing a major investigation shortly before stepping away from her career. "Jonathan, you won't believe this," Mike exclaimed one afternoon as he entered Jonathan's office at the community center. "Natalie was following the same corruption network we exposed. She had discovered key pieces of the story that took us months to put together." Jonathan was stunned. Why didn't she ever tell me? And why did she leave it unfinished? The answers arrived days later in the form of a letter Natalie had left in a safety deposit box, with instructions to be delivered to Jonathan if anything ever happened to her. Hands shaking, Jonathan opened the letter. "My dearest Jonathan, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. There's something important I want you to know. The investigation I was working on before we married, it was risky. I'd uncovered a network of corruption that reached the highest levels in the city. They threatened me, and I chose to walk away to protect you and our future family. Looking back, I know I was wrong. The truth can't be hidden forever. Please forgive me for not sharing this sooner, and I hope one day you find the strength to continue what I started. Remember, love overcomes fear, and the truth, though painful, is the path to freedom. With all my love, Natalie. Jonathan felt time freeze as he processed her words. Every action he had taken suddenly felt part of something bigger. He realized that beyond his fight for a brighter future for Doris, he had unknowingly been fulfilling Natalie's last wish. That night, Jonathan had a heartfelt conversation with Doris, revealing to her the truth about her mother and the bravery she'd shown. "Your mother was a hero, Doris," Jonathan said, his voice catching with emotion. "And now I understand why she always said that being a true Harrison means doing what's right, no matter the cost." Doris hugged her father tightly, letting the revelation sink in. "So, Mum's been watching over us all this time?" she asked. Jonathan nodded, feeling both pain and gratitude as he held his daughter. "Yes, my love, and she'll continue to do so always." In the days that followed, a fresh wave of transformation swept over them. Jonathan made the decision to establish a foundation in Natalie's honor, with the goal of Reynoldsing investigative journalism and advancing open government. Natalie's story, once shared publicly, added a new layer to the city's unfolding narrative. It developed into more than just the story of a businessman taking action to change the world. It was the realization of a dream that two people, united by love and a common vision for a better world, had cherished. As the city's revitalization progressed, Jonathan and Doris drew renewed strength from Natalie's enduring influence. The community center, foundation, and each step they took now held a richer purpose. One afternoon, as Jonathan and Doris planted a tree in the community center's garden in Natalie's memory, Doris looked at her dad with a warm smile. "Dad, I think I finally understand what it means to be a true Harrison," she said. "Oh yeah?" Jonathan responded, intrigued. "And what does that mean, sweetheart?" "It means never forgetting where we come from, standing up for what's right, and always, always leaving the world a little better than we found it," Doris replied with a firm conviction. Jonathan's heart filled with pride and affection. "That's exactly right, my brave Doris. And as long as we remember that, your mother's legacy will carry on forever." As the sun dipped below the skyline of the changing city, Jonathan and Doris stood side by side, planting seeds of hope, both in the ground and in their hearts, for a brighter, more just future. Though the journey ahead would be full of challenges, they knew Natalie's memory and their love would help them face anything. As the months passed, the city showed a remarkable transformation. Jonathan Harrison's anti-corruption efforts, bolstered by Natalie's newfound legacy, were visibly reshaping the city. But, as is often the case with sweeping changes, not everyone was pleased with the new direction. One morning, while reviewing plans for a new affordable housing initiative, Jonathan received a tense call from Mike. "Jonathan, we have a problem," Mike said, his voice strained. "It appears that some of Gabriel Holmes's former associates are regrouping, aiming to disrupt our reform initiatives." Jonathan's face tightened, a familiar worry creeping in. "What exactly are they up to?" he asked. "They're leveraging their remaining connections to block key bills, spread false information, and even more troubling, they're targeting your reputation. And Natalie's," Jonathan added, his fist clenching at the mention of her name. It had been months since the truth about her investigation surfaced, and the thought of anyone tarnishing her memory was intolerable. "We've got to tackle this head-on," Jonathan said firmly. Let's arrange a press conference. It's time to address the public directly. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Jonathan, alongside Mike and their team, worked tirelessly to gather every piece of evidence needed to counter the accusations spreading like wildfire. At home, Doris noticed the strain on her father. "Dad, is everything okay?" she asked one night over dinner. Jonathan tried to reassure her with a smile, though the fatigue was clear in his eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, just a bit of work stress." Doris looked at him with an insight beyond her years. It's those bad people again, isn't it? The ones who don't want the city to get better. Her understanding surprised Jonathan, but he nodded. "Yes, Doris, there are folks who aren't happy with the changes we're making, but don't worry. We'll sort it out." "Can I help?" Doris asked, her eyes bright with determination. Jonathan's smile grew more genuine. "You know, you just might be able to help. I have an idea." The day of the press conference finally arrived. The media gathered in front of City Hall, buzzing with speculation about potential revelations. Jonathan stepped up to the podium, Doris at his side, causing a stir of whispers among the reporters. "Good morning," Jonathan began. "I stand here today not just as Jonathan Harrison, the businessman or the advocate, but as a citizen of this city, and as a father." He paused, catching Doris's encouraging smile. "In recent months, we've made significant changes in our community, changes many of you have backed and believed in. But lately, there are those who are trying to discredit these efforts, hoping to return to the old ways of corruption and inequality." He stopped, looking at Doris once more. "But I'm not here today to defend myself. I'm here to remind everyone why we took this path, to create a better world for our children and secure a brighter future." Years ago, my late wife Natalie embarked on this mission, putting everything on the line to reveal the truth. Now today, her daughter, our daughter, has something she wants to share with you. Jonathan stepped back from the microphone, making space for Doris to speak. Doris leaned in, stretching to reach the mic, her voice clear and steady as it echoed across the square. "My name is Doris Harrison," she began, "and I want to tell you about the kind of city I imagine. A place where every child has a safe home, where they can attend school without fear, where their parents have fair jobs, and where nobody has to hide or deceive just to feel secure." The journalists stood silently, drawn in by the genuine and hopeful message of the young girl. "I know some people want things to go back to the way they used to be," Doris continued. "But is that really what you want for your kids and grandchildren? My mum and dad taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but doing what's right in spite of it. So I'm asking you to join us in this journey. Let's be brave together and build the city we all deserve." Following Doris's conclusion, there was a brief hush in the crowd, then thunderous applause. With tears in his eyes, Jonathan embraced his daughter, aware that he had just witnessed an extraordinary moment. In the days that followed, Doris's speech went viral. Her powerful image and heartfelt call for a better future resonated deeply, reaching people far beyond any political address. Public support for Jonathan's initiatives surged, and the attempts to undermine him weakened against the honesty and hope that Doris had inspired. Even some of his former adversaries began rethinking their stance. But not everyone welcomed the change. One evening, as Jonathan and Doris were returning home from the community center, they found a message scrawled in red on their front door. "Traitors." Doris squeezed her father's hand. "Dad, why would someone do this?" Jonathan sighed, wrapping an arm around her. "Change can be scary for some people, sweetheart. But we won't let this stop us, right?" Doris nodded, her determination shining through. "No, we won't. Mum would never have given up. And neither will we. The following day, instead of just cleaning off the graffiti, Jonathan and Doris invited neighbors and kids from the community center to help them paint a mural on their door. What emerged was a bright, hopeful vision of their dream city, symbolizing unity and resilience. As they painted, more people joined in, bringing food, music, and most importantly, their support. What started as a simple act of defiance transformed into a citywide celebration. Mike, who had joined the event, walked over to Jonathan. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I think we might have just stumbled upon our new campaign approach." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "Oh, how so?" "Instead of pushing back against negativity," Mike explained, "let's drown it out with positivity. Community murals, neighborhood cleanups, mentorship programs. Let's not just talk about a better city. Let's get people involved in building it." Jonathan grinned, watching Doris laugh as she painted alongside other kids. "You're onto something, and I think I've got the perfect ambassador for this movement." In the following months, the city experienced a surge of color and optimism. Murals blossomed in previously overlooked areas, community initiatives popped up everywhere, and people began stepping up to make a difference in their surroundings. Doris, with her endless energy and clarity of purpose, became the face of this new wave. Her innocence and resolve inspired both the young and the old, and although resistance remained, those who resisted change found themselves up against a force even stronger, the united hope of a city rediscovering its soul. One evening, as Jonathan reflected on it all, he thought of Natalie. "We did it, love," he whispered to the stars. "Not quite how we planned, but we did it." The city wasn't perfect yet, but it was on the right path. With each brushstroke of paint, each act of kindness, and each new community event, it inched closer to the dream Natalie had envisioned, the one Jonathan carried forward, and that Doris now led into the future. Fresh challenges started to emerge as the city's transformation continued under Jonathan's leadership and Doris's contagious spirit. Even though many people welcomed progress, it also sparked unexpected problems that threatened the delicate balance they had worked so hard to achieve. One morning, as Jonathan reviewed the latest updates on urban renewal, Mike rushed into his office looking visibly uneasy. "Jonathan, we've got a problem," he said, laying a stack of papers on the desk. "Our new transparency policies and development plans are pushing some major companies out. They're threatening to leave and take thousands of jobs if we don't ease up on a few regulations." Jonathan's expression darkened as he scanned the pages. "We can't backtrack now, Mike. We've come too far." Mike sighed and ran his hand through his hair, frustration evident. "I know, but people are worried. If we lose those jobs, it could spell economic trouble for us." Jonathan reclined in his chair, the weight of responsibility pressing down. They'd worked so hard to clean up the city, but he wondered if they were trading one problem for another. That evening over dinner, Doris noticed her dad's worried expression. "Dad, are you okay? You look sad." Jonathan attempted a reassuring smile, but Doris could see through it. "It's complicated, sweetheart. Sometimes, making the right choice comes with tough consequences." Doris thought for a moment. "Like when we moved away from the community center to keep me safe. That was hard, but things turned out all right." Jonathan felt a swell of pride in her understanding. Exactly. But this time, it could mean a lot of people losing their jobs because of our plans. Doris frowned, absorbing his words. "But Dad, didn't you say those companies weren't treating people right? Isn't it better to have fewer jobs that are actually fair?" Her words struck Jonathan. She was right, but reality was messy. Still, Doris's perspective reminded him of why they'd begun this journey. The following day, Jonathan called an urgent meeting with his team and local leaders. The air was tense as he laid out the situation. "We can't abandon our reforms," he said firmly, "but we can't ignore the economic risks either. We have to find a solution that sticks to our principles while looking out for our citizens." For the next few weeks, Jonathan's team threw themselves into devising a new plan. They rolled out incentives for companies that followed the new ethical guidelines, retraining programs for workers in shifting industries, and a push to attract socially responsible businesses. Yet not everyone was on board. Protests erupted, with some people rallying to stay the course and others urging a return to the old ways out of job security fears. Amid the chaos, Doris came up with an idea. "Dad, what if we show people what the city could look like if we keep moving forward? Kind of like when we painted that mural on our door." Inspired by her suggestion, Jonathan launched a large-scale visualization campaign. Through augmented reality and interactive exhibits, they gave citizens a glimpse of the city 5, 10, and 20 years into a cleaner, fairer future. The campaign was a huge hit. People were able to walk through the streets of a thriving, prosperous city that embodied their shared vision for a better tomorrow. They now saw thriving parks where smoky factories once polluted the air, brand new schools in previously underserved areas, and a more balanced economy free from corruption. Public opinion turned back in favor of the reforms, but Jonathan knew that just words and images wouldn't suffice. They needed to see quick, concrete results. In a bold move, Jonathan committed a significant portion of his personal wealth to launch a fund for economic transition. This fund would support workers affected by the reforms, provide seed money for ethical startups, and help local small businesses thrive. "It's risky," Mike cautioned. "You could lose everything." Jonathan simply smiled, thinking of Natalie and the future they were working toward for Doris. "Some risks are worth taking," he replied. The next few months were a whirlwind. The city was buzzing with new ideas and a spirit of change. Former industrial sites turned into hubs for clean technology, while education and training programs blossomed in each community. After a time of uncertainty, the economy began to stabilize, showing signs of sustainable growth. But progress came at a price. Jonathan was working long hours, often coming home drained. Doris, proud of her father's achievements, felt his absence more each day. One evening, Jonathan arrived home to find Doris waiting for him, her expression unusually serious. "Dad, we need to talk," she said, sounding wise beyond her years. Jonathan sat down, concerned. "What's on your mind, honey?" he asked. "I'm proud of what you're doing," Doris began, "but I miss you. And I think maybe sometimes you miss just being my dad, too." Her words hit Jonathan like a wake-up call. He realized that in his drive to create a better future, he had been losing sight of the present. "You're absolutely right, Doris," he said, pulling her into a hug. "I've been so focused on changing the city, I almost forgot what matters most: our family." That moment marked a turning point. Jonathan started delegating more responsibilities, trusting his team and setting aside time just for Doris. They resumed their visits to the community center, their game nights, and heart-to-heart talks about Doris's own dreams for the future. While the city continued its transformation, the anniversary of Natalie's passing drew closer. Though both busy, Jonathan and Doris felt the significance of the approaching date. One afternoon, while sorting through family photos, Doris found a picture that captured her attention. Doris held up an old photograph of Natalie standing in front of a run-down building, holding a sign that read, "Future Community Arts Center." "Dad, what's this?" she asked, passing the photo to Jonathan, who took it with a mix of nostalgia and surprise. "That was one of your mum's projects," Jonathan began, his voice tinged with emotion. "She dreamed of transforming that place into an arts center for kids from underprivileged neighborhoods. Unfortunately, she never got the chance to make it happen." Doris glanced back at the picture, then at her father, her eyes lighting up with resolve. "What if we did it, Dad? As a way to honor Mum." Her suggestion sparked something deep within Jonathan. Together, they dug into research and discovered that the building remained vacant, untouched, amidst the city's many changes over the years. Inspired and motivated, Jonathan and Doris launched into bringing Natalie's dream to life. They reached out to local artists, educators, and community leaders. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with people eager to donate their time and resources to the cause. But the road wasn't easy. The building required major renovations, and the repair costs quickly started exceeding their initial estimates. Plus, some neighbors voiced concerns about the potential noise and increased traffic the arts center could bring. Jonathan and Doris didn't let these challenges hold them back. They organized meetings, addressed the community's concerns, and worked toward collaborative solutions. Doris, with her natural charm and passion, became the project's face, speaking to locals about how the center could transform lives and uplift the neighborhood. As the anniversary of Natalie's passing drew near, they faced a daunting setback. A group of developers, eyeing the area's renewed potential, made an offer to purchase the building and adjacent land to construct luxury apartments. The city council, tempted by the prospect of increased tax revenue, seriously considered the proposal. Jonathan found himself at odds with the very interests he once represented. Then, Doris suggested a bold idea. "Dad, what if we make the arts center appeal to everyone, not just kids? We could add spaces for local artists to sell their work, adult classes, and maybe even a small cafe. That way, it could support itself financially." Doris's proposal marked a pivotal moment, offering a revamped business plan that highlighted not just the project's financial sustainability, but also its significant community impact. Jonathan persuaded the city council to greenlight the Natalie Harrison Arts Center. On the anniversary of Natalie's passing, instead of a solemn remembrance, the city celebrated the vibrant inauguration of the center. Once abandoned and overlooked, the building now radiated with colorful murals, echoing with children's laughter, music, and creativity. Along with family, friends, and neighbors, Jonathan and Doris cut the ceremonial ribbon together. Mike Melissa from the community center, along with many others who had supported their journey, gathered to rejoice. "Your mother would be so proud," Jonathan whispered to Doris, tears glistening as they watched the children explore the new spaces. Doris held her father's hand tightly. "I know, Dad. I feel her with us." In the following months, the Natalie Harrison Arts Center grew into a vibrant symbol of creativity and hope for the city. Children who had never experienced art education discovered hidden talents, and local artists found a welcoming space to showcase and sell their work. The cafe became a lively meeting spot, strengthening community bonds. Beyond its immediate influence, the center stood for something greater. It proved that dreams, though cut short, could still flourish. It served as a powerful reminder that positive change, while challenging and often painful, was achievable. For Jonathan, the center embodied a journey that had begun years before when he made the choice to honor his daughter's love and his wife's memory. In each brushstroke, every note, and in the laughter of children passing through, he saw Natalie's legacy live on. To Doris, the center was both a fulfilled promise and a fresh start. In making her mother's dream a reality, she found her own passion for art and community. She spent much of her free time at the center, teaching young kids and honing her own artistic talents. One afternoon, as Jonathan watched Doris lead an art project for a group of kids, he realized that Natalie's real legacy wasn't just the building or the programs, but the compassion, creativity, and courage she had passed down to their daughter. The Natalie Harrison Arts Center became a testament to the city's transformation. a heartfelt reminder that a dream, nurtured with love and resilience, could blossom in the most unexpected of places. For Jonathan and Doris, it was more than a center. It was a second home, where the past, present, and future wove together in a vibrant tapestry of color and hope.